The night a billionaire pretended to be his own driver, everything he thought he knew about himself began to fall apart. He wasn't doing it for fun. He was following the quiet black maid who worked inside his mansion, the one who left every night carrying a locked metal box like she was protecting something bigger than her own life. Tonight he would finally find out what she was hiding. The morning light spilled across the marble floors of the Caro estate, pale and cold, the way Ethan Caro preferred it. He stood at the tall window of his home office phone, pressed to his ear, listening to a board member stammer through numbers that should have been on his desk the day before. "I don't want excuses, Reynolds," Ethan said, voice flat. "I want the projections on my screen in 10 minutes. If they aren't, we'll have a different conversation tomorrow and you won't like the subject." He ended the call without waiting for a reply. The silence that followed was the silence he had built his life around, the silence of men and women who had learned not to interrupt him. The door opened without a knock. Vivian swept in, already dressed for the afternoon, though it was not yet 9. She held a phone in one hand and a tablet in the other, scrolling through something that mattered only to her. "Ethan, the gala on Saturday," she said. "Theodore's wife is wearing emerald. I refuse to stand next to her in anything that reads green on camera. I need to know if you're renting the Bentley or if we're taking the Rolls because the dress has to match the car. Take whatever you want." "That is not a decision, that is abdication." "Vivian, I'm working." She made a small sound that meant he had failed her in some familiar way. Then she was gone, the door closing with the particular softness of expensive hinges. A moment later, another figure appeared in the doorway. Lily, 10 years old, barefoot, holding a sheet of paper with both hands the way a child holds something precious. Her dark hair was still tangled from sleep. "Daddy, look. I drew our house. But I put a big tree in front because you said you wanted one." Ethan glanced at the drawing without moving from the window. "That's nice, sweetheart. Do you want to keep it? Leave it on the desk." She set the paper down, carefully smoothed the edges with one small hand, and waited a beat to see if he would look again. He did not. She walked out without a word. Through the tall window, Ethan watched a figure cross the garden path below, carrying a tray of silver coffee service toward the side entrance. Naomi Banks. The maid had been with the household for almost 2 years. He knew her name the way he knew the names of his gardeners and his kitchen staff, which was to say barely and only when he needed something from them. A few minutes later, she entered the office with the tray. She set it down on the side table without a sound. She did not look at him. She never did. Her movements were economical, practiced as if she had learned long ago how to be invisible in rooms where invisibility was a form of survival. "Thank you," Ethan said, not turning. "Yes, sir." She left. Lily's drawing sat on the desk, and he did not look at it once the whole morning. The day was long. A conference call with Singapore, a legal review, a lunch he ate alone at his desk. By late afternoon, a client meeting was canceled, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan found himself home before dark. He walked through the back corridor of the estate, the one that ran past the staff pantry and the rear stairs, a hallway he almost never used. He was heading to the wine cellar, thinking about a bottle he had been saving when he turned a corner and nearly walked into Naomi. She startled. In her hands was a small metal box, perhaps the size of a shoebox, dull silver with a keyhole set into the lid. The moment she saw him, her posture shifted, and in a single motion, she tucked the box into the canvas bag slung over her shoulder, as if she had practiced that exact movement 1,000 times. "Mr. Caro, I'm sorry I didn't know you were home." "What is that?" "Just my things, sir. I was heading out. My shift ended 15 minutes ago." "What kind of things?" She looked at him directly for the first time he could remember. Her eyes were steady, brown, careful. "Personal, sir." He could have pressed her. He was her employer. He could have demanded she open the bag. Something in her stillness stopped him. Not fear, exactly. Something older and more deliberate, like a door that had been closed for a long time and knew how to stay closed. "Good night, Naomi." "Good night, sir." She walked past him toward the staff entrance. He stood in the corridor listening to her footsteps until they faded. Later in his study, he called for the head housekeeper. Mrs. Alvarez, a woman who had been with the family since before Lily was born, settled into the chair across from him. "Naomi, how long has she been carrying that box?" Mrs. Alvarez thought about it. "Since she started, sir. Every evening when she leaves. It is the same box, I believe." "Has anyone ever seen what is in it?" "No, sir. She keeps it locked." "Has anything gone missing from the house?" "Nothing, sir. I count the silver myself. The jewelry is inventoried monthly. There is nothing missing." "Where does she go after her shift?" "I do not know, sir. She does not speak of her personal affairs. She is polite, she is clean, she is on time. She is one of the best workers we have had." Ethan dismissed her with a nod. That night he stood at the upstairs window and watched Naomi walk down the long curved driveway toward the gate. A taxi was waiting for her on the street. Before she stepped into the cab, she turned and looked back at the house. Just for a second. Her face in the sodium light of the street lamp was not the face of a servant. It was the face of a woman measuring something, holding something back. Fear, perhaps. Or its older cousin, something closer to grief. The taxi pulled away. Ethan stayed at the window long after it was gone. The next morning, Ethan made 2 phone calls. The first was to his personal driver telling the man to take the night off fully paid. The second was to Marcus Hale. Marcus arrived within the hour, as he always did. He was 52 silver at the temples, the kind of lawyer who wore suits that cost more than most people's cars and never had to be told where to sit. He had been with Ethan for more than 15 years. He had handled things for Ethan that no other man living knew about. "What's the problem?" Marcus asked, settling into the leather chair across the desk. "The maid, Naomi. She leaves every night with a locked box. Nothing is missing from the house, but something is off. She could be feeding information to a competitor, a journalist. I don't know." Marcus listened with the easy patience of a man who had already heard the question in his head before it left Ethan's mouth. His answer came a beat too smoothly. "She's not a problem, Ethan. I can tell you that right now." "How would you know?" "Because I vetted her before she set foot in this house. I vet every person who enters this building. That's my job. If there was something wrong with the maid, she wouldn't be the maid. And yet she carries a locked box out of my home every night." Marcus lifted one shoulder. "Private people have private lives. If you want me to dig deeper, I'll put a man on her. 2 days we'll know every address she visits, every person she meets. But I'll tell you what we'll find. A church, a cousin, a boyfriend she doesn't want you to ask about. You're looking for trouble where there isn't any." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Marcus waited the way he always waited, patient, as a man who had never once in his life lost a negotiation. "No," Ethan said finally. "I'll handle it myself." Marcus's jaw moved very slightly. It was the only sign. "Yourself. Tonight, I'll follow her. Ethan, with respect, you don't follow people. You have people who follow people. Tonight I want to see it with my own eyes." Marcus studied him for a long moment. Whatever he saw on Ethan's face made him close his folder and stand. "As you wish. But if anything comes of it, anything you call me first. Not the police, not anyone. Me." "Understood." Marcus stopped at the door. "You're the boss, Ethan. You always have been. I just clean up." He left. Ethan sat at the desk for a long time after not quite sure why the word clean had caught in his chest like a splinter, or why Marcus had answered questions he had not yet asked. At 6:45 that evening, Ethan dressed in jeans, a dark jacket, and a plain canvas cap pulled low. He looked at himself in the mirror, and for a strange second did not recognize the man looking back. He slipped down to the garage through the staff corridor, got into the black Mercedes sedan used for household errands, and waited. At 7 o'clock exactly, Naomi appeared at the staff door. She crossed to the car, opened the rear passenger door, and slid in without looking at the driver. She never looked at the drivers. Ethan changed them too often for her to bother learning faces. "Good evening," she said in the polite, distant voice she used for men she would never see again. "Evening, ma'am," Ethan said, dropping his voice half an octave and keeping his chin tucked. She leaned forward and handed him a small folded slip of paper. Written in neat block letters was an address. Ethan looked at the paper. He read the street name. He read it again. Lawrence Street, Dorchester. His hands, without his permission, went cold on the steering wheel. The name hit him like a sound from underwater, muffled at first, then sharp. Lawrence Street was not a place he had been to in 12 years. Lawrence Street was a place he had promised himself in the particular silent way a man makes promises to himself in the middle of the night that he would never drive down again for as long as he lived. He did not turn around. He did not ask her to repeat it. He folded the paper, once set it on the dashboard, and put the car into gear. In the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of her face. She was looking out the window, her expression unreadable, her hands folded over the canvas bag in her lap. The locked box was inside it. He could see the faint rectangular shape through the fabric. The gate opened. The Mercedes rolled out into the night. Somewhere ahead, a street he had buried was waiting for him. He pressed the accelerator. The city he knew bled away behind him as the Mercedes rolled south. First came the glass towers of the financial district, their windows lit in clean geometric patterns, and then the low brick warehouses along the expressway, and then the older neighborhoods where the streetlights leaned and the sidewalks sagged with the memory of too many winters. Ethan kept his hands tight on the wheel. He kept his eyes on the road the way a man keeps his eyes on a flame he does not want to stare at directly. In the rearview mirror, Naomi sat very still. She had not spoken since giving him the address. She watched the city pass without surprise, without hurry, the way a person watches a route she has traveled 100 times and can predict block by block. A memory rose in him without permission. A wet street, headlamps cutting through rain, the sharp, sour burn of whiskey on his own breath. A shape in the road that he had registered too late, or perhaps registered in time and refused to slow for he could never be sure which. The sound of something heavy meeting the front of the car. 12 years had not dulled that sound. He had only learned to keep it in a part of his mind he rarely visited. He blinked and the memory dissolved. Lawrence Street was still 10 minutes away. "Take the second exit, please," Naomi said quietly from the back. "Yes, ma'am." His voice sounded wrong in his own ears, lower than usual, strained. She did not seem to notice. She was looking at the buildings now, her shoulder turned slightly toward the window, and for a moment in the passing glow of a streetlight, her face caught him. There was something in the line of her jaw and the set of her mouth that felt familiar in a way he could not place. He had seen that face before, or some piece of it in another life. He dismissed the thought. He was seeing ghosts because he was driving toward one. The exit curved down into a neighborhood of old triple-decker houses, narrow driveways and corner stores with metal grates pulled halfway across their windows. A man walked a dog along the curb. A woman sat on a front stoop smoking and watching the street. No one in this place looked at the black Mercedes with curiosity, only with the flat indifference of people who had learned long ago that expensive cars meant nothing except that they were not staying. "Here," Naomi said. "2 blocks ahead on the right. Pull over by the church." Ethan eased the car to the curb. The church was a small wooden one, white paint, peeling a hand-painted sign out front announcing a Wednesday evening service in 2 languages. Beyond it, a row of houses slumped shoulder to shoulder their porches, leaning some with plywood over broken windows. Naomi unzipped a small pocket inside her bag and drew out a folded stack of bills. She leaned forward and placed them on the center console. Ethan could see they were hundreds crisp, perhaps 5 of them. "This is for waiting. 90 minutes. Please do not leave, and please do not follow. I will come back to this spot. If I am not here in 2 hours, you are free to go." "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you." She opened the door and stepped out into the cold. Ethan watched her in the side mirror as she walked up the street, the canvas bag hugged against her side, the weight of the metal box visible in the way her shoulder dropped. She did not look back. She did not glance at the car. She moved with the focused economy of someone who had somewhere to be and had no time to waste on a driver who had already been paid. He waited 5 minutes. He counted them on the dashboard clock, watching the minute digit change with the slow heaviness of a countdown. Then he pulled the key from the ignition, tucked the bills into the glove compartment, adjusted the cap low over his face, and stepped out into the street. The night air smelled of cold asphalt and distant frying oil from a restaurant a block away. He kept to the shadows between the streetlights. Naomi was already half a block ahead, crossing to the opposite sidewalk, and he followed at a distance that felt paranoid and insufficient at the same time. She stopped at a narrow wooden house near the end of the block. It was 2 stories painted a color that had once been blue and was now the color of tired water. The front porch sagged at one corner. A ramp had been built over what had once been the front steps, a homemade ramp of pressure-treated lumber that someone had clearly constructed with more love than skill. She climbed the ramp, fished a key from her pocket, and let herself in. A warm yellow light spilled briefly onto the porch before the door closed behind her. Ethan crossed the street slow, keeping his head down. He moved along the neighbor's fence using the overgrown hedges as cover until he reached the side of the house where a narrow gap ran between the foundation and the fence line. A single window glowed on the ground floor. The blinds were drawn but not tight. Through the gap between the slats he could see inside. What he saw stopped him cold. The room had once been a living room. A couch had been pushed against the far wall, and in the space where a coffee table might have stood, there was now a hospital bed, the kind with rails and a crank, the kind insurance companies sometimes provided and sometimes did not. A man lay in the bed. He was tall, or had been tall once, the kind of frame that looked too long for the mattress. His hair was cropped short and shot through with gray. An oxygen line ran from a concentrator in the corner to a nasal cannula at his face. An IV stand stood beside the bed, empty at the moment, but ready. Naomi was leaning over him, speaking softly, her hand on his forehead. She straightened, crossed to a small table by the window, and opened the metal box. It was not jewelry. It was not stolen silver. It was not documents from the Caro offices. It was medicine. Small amber bottles, labeled in pharmacy print. Blister packs of pills. A row of insulin pens capped and arranged by date. A folder of medical records, their edges soft with handling. And beneath all of it, a bank envelope stuffed thick with cash, the kind of envelope someone builds up slowly over months. Ethan stood in the narrow space beside the fence, with his breath fogging in the cold, and he felt something heavy shift in his chest. He had prepared himself on the drive over for many possibilities. He had thought of theft. He had thought of blackmail. He had thought in the darker corners of his mind of an affair, or an illegitimate child, or a drug habit. He had not prepared himself for this. He had not prepared himself for the sight of a young woman counting out pills by a bedside lamp, her hand tender on a sick man's arm, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a conversation. She was caring for someone. She was not hiding a sin. She was hiding a burden. But that did not explain the secrecy. It did not explain the locked box, the refusal to speak of where she went, the taxi in the dark, the look she had given the house before she left it. Something was still underneath this, something sharper than tenderness, and he could feel the edge of it pressing up against the window glass. He moved around the side of the house, staying close to the wall until he reached the back. There was a small enclosed porch off the kitchen, its screen torn in places, its boards soft. A single bulb burned above a side door. He could hear voices now, the kind of voices people use late at night when they did not want to wake a sick person in the next room. The kitchen window was cracked open an inch. The voices were clearer here. One was Naomi's. The other belonged to an older woman, warm and rough, the kind of voice that had been smoothed by decades of use. "How has he been this week?" the older woman asked. "Better than last?" "Some days, yes," Naomi answered. "Some days he knows where he is. Yesterday morning he called me by my mother's name, and I let him because when he thinks she's here, he eats his breakfast. And the rest of the time he calls for my father." There was a soft sound from the older woman, a low laugh that wasn't really a laugh. "Child, your father is right there in that bed." "I know, Miss Ruth, but he doesn't always know it. Sometimes he talks about himself in the third person. Sometimes he talks to a man who isn't in the room." A breath. "Yesterday he said a name." "Whose name?" "The man who did this to him." Ethan leaned his forehead against the cold wood siding. His pulse had begun to beat in his ears, slow and heavy the way it had once in a hospital corridor a long time ago when he had been waiting for a doctor to tell him whether his father was still alive. Miss Ruth spoke again. "Naomi, are you still working for him?" "Yes." "After all this time, in his house, serving his wife coffee, folding his little girl's laundry?" "Yes, Miss Ruth." "Why, child? Just tell me why one more time. Because every time I come over here I want to understand, and every time I leave I still don't." Naomi's breath was audible through the cracked window, the breath of someone who had answered this question to herself so many times that the answer had worn a groove in her. "Because no one else will pay what he pays. Because the clinic over on Columbia will see my father twice a month if I can bring cash on the first visit. Because the pills in that box cost more in a week than I used to make in a month. Because if I quit that house, my father dies in this one. There are other rich houses. There aren't any that owe him what that one owes him." A silence followed long enough that Ethan thought for a moment they had left the room. "Does he know?" Miss Ruth asked. "That you know?" "No. He doesn't look at me long enough to know anything about me. To him, I'm the hand that sets down the coffee cup. That's all I've ever been. That's all I need to be until I'm ready." "Ready for what?" "Ready to say it out loud. To the right person. In a place where saying it will mean something. Not tonight. Not this year, maybe. But one day. My father deserves for somebody to know what happened to him and for that person to be made to carry it the way we have carried it." Miss Ruth made a small sound, not quite agreement, not quite sorrow. "You're a better woman than I would have been, child." "I'm not better. I'm just tired. And my father is still alive. That's the only thing that matters right now." Ethan heard the scrape of a chair. Footsteps. Miss Ruth must have gone down a hallway because her voice faded. He stood frozen against the siding, his breath coming short, his hand braced on the cold wall to keep himself upright. 2 years. She had worked in his house for 2 years. 2 years of walking past him in corridors. 2 years of setting trays down without meeting his eyes. 2 years of knowing exactly who he was and what he had done, and choosing silence over the only thing that would have felt like justice because her father's life depended on the wages he paid her. He should have turned around then. He should have walked back to the car and driven away and never spoken of this night to anyone. Something made him move forward instead. Something made him step quietly along the back of the house until he reached the window of the sick room where the blinds hung imperfectly against the glass. He looked in. Naomi had her back to him. She was adjusting the pillow behind her father's head. The sick man's eyes were open now, and the lamp on the bedside table caught the side of his face clearly for the first time. There was a scar. It ran from just above his right temple down along the line of his jaw, pale against his dark skin, the kind of scar left by shattered glass and asphalt and a long surgery in an underfunded trauma bay. Ethan had seen that scar before. Not on a living face. He had seen it in his own mind in the pieces of memory he had allowed himself to keep the fragments his conscience had refused to let him throw away completely. The face was older now, thinner. One side of it drooped slightly, a mouth pulled down by damage. But the bones were the same. The forehead was the same. It was the man. The man he had struck on a rainy street in Dorchester 12 years ago on the drive home from a partner dinner where he had drunk 4 old fashions and told himself he was fine. The man he had seen in the road too late or not quite too late. The man whose body had been thrown forward by the impact, whose head had cracked against the curb, whose blood had run in a thin, dark line toward the storm drain, while Ethan sat shaking in his car with his hands still on the wheel. The man he had been told was dead. The man Marcus Hale had stood in Ethan's kitchen at 4 in the morning and said in that calm voice, "It's handled. The driver on the other end was a drunk. They'll pin it on him. He's already dead, so there's no one to argue. You were never there. Go upstairs and go to sleep." The man in the hospital bed turned his head very slowly toward the window. He could not have seen Ethan. The blinds were in the way the angle was wrong, and his eyes, clouded with the long fog of brain injury, probably could not have focused through glass at night in any case. But something in the sick man's face shifted the way a sleeping dog's ears shift at a familiar footstep. Ethan staggered back from the window. His legs went out from under him for a second, and he caught himself against the fence, the wood splintering slightly under his palm. He pressed his hand to his mouth. He could not breathe. The cold air was pouring into his lungs and turning into something he could not use. He had not killed a man. He had maimed him. For 12 years he had carried the weight of a death that was not a death. For 12 years he had lived as the author of one crime, while the actual crime had kept breathing in a narrow house on Lawrence Street, being spoon-fed and bathed and medicated by a daughter who had grown from a girl of 16 into a woman who had come to work in his home. He thought with a kind of sick clarity of the math of it. A teenage girl with a hospital bill and a father who could not work. A nursing degree abandoned halfway through because a person cannot attend lectures and sit by a bedside at the same time. Years of cheap apartments and double shifts and whatever work a young woman could find that paid in cash or close to it. Somewhere along the way, someone must have told her where the money was. Someone must have told her about the Caro estate, about the pay, about the benefits. Or perhaps she had researched it herself. Perhaps she had known from the start. Perhaps she had walked into his house with her eyes already open, knowing whose coffee she was bringing, knowing whose daughter she was folding sweaters for, knowing whose hand had done this to her family, and had simply decided that her father's pills were worth more than her rage. And Marcus. Marcus had told him the man was dead. Marcus had lied. Or perhaps Marcus had not lied in the simple sense. Perhaps Marcus had simply allowed Ethan to believe. Perhaps the body on the road had been alive when the ambulance came. Perhaps Marcus had arranged the story paid, the witnesses steered the report, and let Ethan sleep by telling him the only thing that would let him sleep. Ethan had never asked a follow-up question. Not once in 12 years had he asked what happened to the body. He had let the word handled do the work of a conscience. He was not only a man who had run. He was a man who had chosen not to know. He pressed his back against the siding of the house. Above him, through the thin wall, he could hear Naomi's voice again, low and calm, reading aloud. It sounded like a psalm. Her voice was steady. It had always been steady. He understood now what that steadiness had cost her. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He fumbled it out with shaking hands. The screen showed a name he did not want to see. Marcus Hale. He stared at it for 3 rings. Then he stepped away from the house, moving down the narrow alley between the 2 lots, and pressed the phone to his ear. "Ethan?" The voice was as smooth as ever, the voice of a man having a pleasant evening in a leather chair somewhere. "Where are you? You know where I am." "I do. I've had a man on you since you pulled out of the garage. I hope you'll forgive the precaution. When the boss decides to drive himself for the first time in 15 years, a man in my position pays attention. You told me he was dead." There was the briefest silence on the line. Then Marcus, without any change in tone at all, said, "I told you it was handled. That was the agreement. You never asked for details. I respected that. You let me believe I had killed a man. I let you believe what you needed to believe. You had a company to build. You had a life to live. You are now a billionaire, Ethan, because you slept through the nights when most men would have been awake. I gave you those nights. I am not apologizing for them. He is alive, Marcus. In a hospital bed in a house that shouldn't even have heat. He is alive, and his daughter has been in my kitchen for 2 years. I know that too. Ethan stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the narrow alley, the phone pressed hard to his ear, his free hand in a fist at his side. You know. I have known since the week she applied, Ethan. I run background checks on every person who enters your home. I saw the name, I saw the father. I recommended her anyway. Why? Because if she was inside the house, I could watch her. Because if she was ever going to speak, I would hear the first breath of it. Because a girl who needs a paycheck to keep her father alive is a girl who will not set fire to the paycheck. She has been the safest outcome of this problem for 2 years, and she did not even know she was the solution. Now listen to me, Ethan. Listen very carefully. You are going to walk back to that car. You are going to drive home. In the morning, you will call her into your office. You will tell her with regret that her services are no longer needed. You will offer her a severance package generous enough that she will take it without question. She will disappear into her own life. Her father, God bless him, will live or die on his own timetable, which frankly is not long in either direction. And this conversation will never have happened. And if I don't, then I will have to protect myself, which means, unfortunately, I will have to burn you. I have files, Ethan. I have recordings. I have the original accident report before it was revised. I have the cash withdrawals. I have the witness payments in my own handwriting signed off by you by email, though of course the email looks innocent unless you know what it refers to. If I go down for obstruction of justice, you go down for everything that came before it. You will lose the company. You will lose Vivienne. You will lose Lily because family court does not love a father with a manslaughter investigation attached to his name, even an old one, even a closed one once the press gets involved. And make no mistake, I will make sure the press gets involved. Do you understand me? Ethan did not answer. I need to hear you say you understand me, Ethan. I understand you. Good. Drive home. Get some sleep. In the morning, this will all feel manageable again. The line clicked off. Ethan stood in the alley for a long time. A dog was barking somewhere 2 streets over. A siren rose and fell in the distance. A plastic bag skittered past his foot and caught on a chain-link fence. He thought with a strange calm that he had not cried since his father's funeral, and that he was about to cry now standing in an alley in Dorchester with a dead phone in his hand, and that no one in the world who knew him would recognize the man he was in this moment. He sat down on the curb. He put his head in his hands. And for the first time in 12 years, Ethan Caro wept not for what he had done, but for the fact that he had always had a choice, and had always chosen not to look. Above him, in the small lit window of the narrow wooden house, a daughter turned the page of her book and kept reading to her father, unaware that the man who had ruined them both was crying into his hands 50 feet from her door. He did not know how long he sat on the curb. Long enough for the cold to work through his jacket and into his bones. Long enough for the dog 2 streets over to stop barking. Long enough for him to feel for the first time in a life built on forward motion what it meant to have nowhere left to move to. At last he stood. His knees ached. He walked slowly back up the alley past the side window where the lamp still burned around the corner of the wooden house and out onto the sidewalk. He did not hide now. He did not keep to the shadows. He walked down the middle of the street the way a man walks when he has stopped pretending he is anyone else. He returned to the Mercedes and leaned against the driver's door. He waited. 90 minutes came and went. The church clock down the block chimed 10. A little after that, Naomi appeared at the far end of the street, walking toward the car with the canvas bag slung over her shoulder. The box inside it was lighter now. She had left the pills on the bedside table. She had left the money in an envelope under the lamp. She saw him from 20 feet away. She saw that he was standing outside the car and not behind the wheel. She saw that he was not wearing the cap anymore. Her step faltered for half a breath, and then she kept walking slower now, the way a person walks toward a door she has been walking toward for a long time without realizing it. She stopped about 6 feet from him. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The streetlight above them buzzed softly and made their shadows long on the asphalt. "You knew," she said. "I know now." "No, you knew something before tonight. You wouldn't be standing here like this if you didn't. So I'll ask you straight. How long have you known who my father is?" "About an hour." She studied him. Her face was not angry. It was not relieved. It was simply awake in a way that faces rarely are the face of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her head so many times that the real version felt almost ordinary. "An hour," she repeated. "I saw him through the window. I saw the scar. I know what I did." "Say it then." He looked down at the sidewalk. He looked back up at her. 12 years ago on a rainy night 4 blocks from here, I hit your father with my car and I drove away. I let a man I paid tell me it was handled. I never asked what handled meant. I should have asked. I didn't because I didn't want to know." "And the man who told you it was handled?" "Marcus Hale, my lawyer. He knew your father survived. He knew you came to work in my house. He has known every step of the way. He called me tonight from wherever he watches from and told me to go home and fire you in the morning with a generous severance and forget any of this ever happened." Her mouth moved a little, not quite a smile. "And here you are, not in a bedroom, not asleep. Here I am." She looked past him down the long, dark street toward the house where her father was. When she looked back, her eyes had changed. They had stopped measuring him. They were just tired. "So what are you going to do about it, Mr. Caro?" It was the question exactly as he had dreaded it, without performance, without cruelty. She was not begging. She was not threatening. She was giving him the choice that he had avoided for 12 years, and she was doing it with the simple authority of someone who had paid for the right to ask. He took his phone from his pocket. He did not call Marcus. He scrolled to a different name and pressed it. A child's voice answered on the second ring, cheerful and small. "Daddy." "Hi, sweetheart." "Mrs. Alvarez said you went out. Are you coming home soon?" "I'm going to be late, baby. I wanted to ask you something." "Okay." "You remember what you told me last week about the boy at your school who took the other boy's lunch, and you told the teacher even though you were scared?" "Yes." "You told me a good person is somebody who tells the truth even when they're scared. Do you still think that?" "Yes." "Okay. I love you, Lily. I'm going to try very hard to be a good person tonight. Tomorrow you might hear some things about me on the television, or people at school might say things. I want you to know that whatever they say, your daddy was trying to do the right thing. Can you remember that for me?" There was a small silence on the line, the kind only a 10-year-old can hold without filling. "Daddy, are you okay?" "I'm going to be okay. Go to bed, sweetheart. I'll see you tomorrow." "I love you." "I love you too." He ended the call. His hand was steady now for the first time all night. He looked at Naomi. "I need to call an ambulance for your father, the best trauma team at Mass General. Tonight, not tomorrow. There is a surgery he should have had 12 years ago that your family could not afford, and I think there are still things that can be done. After that, I'm going to the precinct on Warren Street, and I am going to give a statement. I would like you to come with me if you are willing. You do not have to. You have done enough. But if you come, the things I say will land heavier, and they should land heavy." She looked at him for a long time. "My father first," she said. "Everything else after." Agreed. He made the call. He used his name, his real name, and the voice on the other end recognized it instantly. Within 14 minutes, an ambulance from Mass General was turning onto Lawrence Street, followed by a second vehicle carrying a neurosurgeon who had been pulled out of his home and told that a private donor was covering everything. Naomi rode in the ambulance with her father. Ethan followed in the Mercedes, keeping the flashing lights in view, his hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel like a student driver. At the hospital, he waited in the corridor outside the trauma bay. He did not sit. He could not sit. At 3 in the morning, a surgeon came out to tell Naomi that her father would live through the night and probably through many nights. After that, there were still procedures to discuss that the damage was old, but not beyond help. Naomi thanked the man in a voice that held together until the doors closed behind him, and then she sank into a plastic chair and covered her face with both hands. Ethan stood 10 feet away and did not approach her. He understood that his nearness was not a comfort she had asked for. By sunrise, he was at the Warren Street precinct with a new attorney on the phone, a woman his corporate counsel had recommended and whom he had never met. He gave a full statement to 2 detectives in a small gray room with a camera mounted in the corner. He named the date. He named the street. He named Marcus Hale. He named the witnesses Marcus had paid as best he could remember them, and he signed a consent for his accounts to be opened. Marcus was arrested at his home that afternoon. By the time the news vans reached the end of his long driveway, he had already made his own phone calls, and by the evening edition, the story was running on every station in the state. The headline was not "Billionaire Confesses." The headline was "Billionaire's Fixer Arrested," and underneath in smaller letters, "Caro CEO Cooperating." Marcus had chosen at the last minute to drag Ethan down with him. He released files to a reporter within the hour. The leaked documents included items Ethan had not known existed: transcripts of conversations, ledger entries, a copy of the original accident report before it had been quietly altered. The second wave of coverage was worse. It was Ethan's name above the fold. It was his face. It was the word manslaughter in a headline, even though the statute of limitations had long ago made that word legally impossible to attach to him. Public opinion is not a prosecutor. Public opinion does not care about timelines. By the end of the week, Caro Holdings had lost 40% of its value. By the end of the second week, Vivian had filed for divorce. She did it through a press statement before she did it through a lawyer, citing the need to protect her daughter from a scandal she had not chosen. The phrase she used on camera was, "I never knew the man I married." It was the most honest thing she had ever said about him, and it was also entirely untrue. She had known. She had simply not needed to think about it. There was no prison. The old hit and run was beyond reach of the statute, and the obstruction charges that might have stuck had been carried out almost entirely by Marcus, with Ethan's role limited to the crime of accepting the benefit. His lawyers argued the technicalities. The civil suits, when they came, were another matter. He did not fight them. He instructed his counsel to settle every one. He signed over 60% of his personal fortune into a trust named for Elijah Banks to be administered by a board on which Naomi held a permanent seat directed to support victims of hit-and-run collisions whose families had been buried by medical costs. He kept enough to live. He kept enough to pay child support. He kept enough for Lily. He gave away the rest without mourning it. He did not try to see Naomi during any of this. He understood that his presence would not be a gift. He understood that her forgiveness, if it ever came, would not be his to request. He waited. 6 months later, he drove a plain sedan up a long gravel drive to a rehabilitation center in western Massachusetts, where Elijah Banks had been transferred after the first round of surgeries. The grounds were quiet. There were trees. A garden in the back had stone paths winding between raised beds of herbs. And on that afternoon, Naomi was pushing her father slowly along one of those paths in a wheelchair. Ethan waited at the edge of the garden until she saw him. She saw him, and she did not turn the chair away. She did not walk toward him either. She simply kept walking at her father's pace and let him come to them. When he reached them, Elijah Banks looked up. 6 months of proper care had given him back some of what had been taken from him. He could speak in full sentences now slowly, and he could sometimes remember the names of people he had met the week before. He looked at Ethan for a long moment with the open, clear gaze of a man who had been told piece by piece who this visitor was. "You," Elijah said at last. His voice was rough but not weak. "You are the one from that night." "Yes, sir, I am." Elijah closed his eyes. A tear worked its way out from under the lashes. When he opened his eyes again, he lifted his right hand, the hand that worked, and held it out. trembling palm up. "I do not forgive you today," he said. "Maybe I never will, but I will let you come back." Ethan took the offered hand carefully, the way a man accepts something far more valuable than he deserves. "Thank you." "You bring my daughter her dignity back," Elijah said. "That is the first step. The rest will take a long time. A long, long time, Mr. Caro. I have the rest of my life, sir." "Yes, you do, and you will spend it." Naomi did not speak. She stood behind her father's chair with one hand on his shoulder, and she did not smile at Ethan, and she did not offer him warmth, but she did not look away. That was more than he had any right to. He understood that. A small voice called from the path behind him. Lily came running across the grass in her weekend sneakers, a fresh drawing clutched in one hand. Ethan had custody of her every other weekend now. He brought her here each time. She had made friends with Elijah over the months, the easy, unguarded friendship only a child can offer to a stranger, and she held out the drawing now with both hands, as if presenting a state document. Elijah accepted it. He studied it. He laughed a low, soft laugh, the first real one Naomi had heard from him in 12 years. Naomi's hand tightened on her father's shoulder, and she looked away for a second, just a second, and when she looked back, there was something in her eyes that had not been there before. It was not forgiveness. It was the faintest possible opening of a door that had been closed a very long time. Ethan stood at the edge of the garden with his daughter beside him and the man he had once left for dead in front of him, and for the first time in 12 years, he did not feel the familiar weight in his chest. He had lost almost everything he had once believed defined him. The company that bore his name was being run now by a board that had voted him out. The marriage was gone. The house was gone. The friends who had orbited him while he was powerful had found other sons. What remained was a daughter who still climbed into his lap on Sunday mornings, a trust that was already keeping 3 families out of the kind of hole his own crime had once dug a garden in western Massachusetts, where he was allowed to stand, and the simple, astonishing fact of a morning he could walk into without lying. Some secrets are not meant to be buried. They wait. They wait for the right person, not the one clever enough to hide, but the one brave enough to come back. He had almost not been that person. He had come very close to driving home that night, to firing her in the morning, to sleeping in his own bed beside a wife who did not love him, while a man he had maimed breathed slowly in a room he would never see. He had chosen the other road by the width of a single phone call to a 10-year-old girl. It was enough. For today, for this garden, for this hand in his, it was enough. He sat down on the low stone bench beside the wheelchair and watched his daughter show Elijah Banks the clouds she had drawn in the corner of the page, and he let himself for the first time in his adult life be exactly where he was. And maybe that is where the story has to end. Not with a courtroom verdict, not with a grand reconciliation, just with a man on a bench beside a garden allowed to sit there because a woman he wronged chose for one more afternoon not to send him away. If Naomi had done what most of us would have done 12 years ago, if she had carried her anger the way anger wants to be carried, Elijah Banks would never have received that surgery. But if Ethan had done what most men in his position would have done that night on Lawrence Street, if he had driven home and fired her, in the morning he would still be sleeping in a house that was killing him one quiet year at a time. 2 people each holding one half of a truth, each given the chance to stay silent. Both of them, in the end, choosing not to. So here is what I want to ask you, and please take your time with it. If you were Naomi after 2 years of folding that family's laundry, after 2 years of knowing, could you have kept walking into that house every morning? Or would you have broken long before he ever looked up from his desk? And if you were Ethan standing in that alley with the phone still warm in your hand and Marcus's voice still in your ear telling you that one easy answer could keep everything you had built, could you honestly say you would have made the call to your daughter instead? I am not asking for the answer you think sounds right. I am asking for the one that is actually true when you are quiet with yourself. Tell me in the comments. I read them. I read the long ones especially. Sometimes what you write there ends up shaping the next story I tell, because the truth is I do not always know where these stories are going until you help me find the edges of them. And if this one moved you even a little, even if it only reminded you of somebody you have been meaning to call, do me one small favor. Subscribe so the next story finds you when it is ready. Hit the like button so the people who need a story like this one actually see it in their feed. And if you know anybody who is sitting on a truth too heavy to keep carrying alone, send this their way. You never know which garden a person is one phone call away from being allowed to sit in. Thank you for staying with me to the end. I will see you in the next one.